Jesus called his 12 disciples to him and gave them authority to drive out evil spirits and to heal every disease and sickness.
The Bible contains remarkable stories of miracles and divine interventions. Moses parted the sea. Peter healed a man lame from his mother's womb. Jesus drove demons out of people and raised others from the dead. But are these types of events still happening today?
We too have a beam of divine light and guidance that God has put within the heart of every man. And it's one of the greatest proofs that there is a God.
More amazing supernatural things are happening than we realize.
This is Divine Intervention, the interview show that features intriguing people who've experienced the hand of God in amazing ways. Divine Intervention was created and produced with the purpose of encouraging believers, spiritual seekers, and skeptics alike that Jesus is alive and is still performing miracles and working in the world today.
I believe in miracles.
Here's your host, Daniel Fazina.
Hello and welcome to another exciting episode of Divine Intervention Radio. I am your host, Daniel Fazina. Man, I am so excited to be with you today because we got an amazing guest that I have been wanting to get on this show for quite a long time. And I'm thrilled to be able to get him on the show this time. And we're going to be talking about a subject that is very dear to my heart, and that is the subject of miracles. And I think it's really going to encourage you and uplift you, and that's the point of this show. I love to encourage people and let them know that God is real, that He is still out there, that He is loving us and caring about us, and one of the ways He lets us know about that is by performing miracles. One of the taglines of this show is, "They," meaning the saints, "overcame the devil by the blood of the Lamb and the word of their testimony." That's from Revelation 12:11. And I always try to feature interesting guests who've had amazing miracles of the Lord in their life to encourage you to know that God is real and that He loves you. Before we bring on our esteemed guest, I want to remind you that if you miss any of the episodes, you can go to the website, divineinterventionradio.com, Divine Intervention Radio, and you can listen to the archives there. And, of course, you can follow us on Facebook, facebook.com/Divine Intervention Radio. You can follow me, Daniel Fazina1, on twitter.com. That's Daniel Fazina, the numeral 1 on twitter.com. And, of course, you can hit me up if you have any questions or if you'd like to submit a testimony or just drop me a line. Matter of fact, why don't you do that today? If you've never taken the time to write in, I'd like to know how the Lord is working in your life, and if this radio show has encouraged you in any way, let me know. divineintervention@mail.com is the email address, divineintervention@mail.com. Now, if you've listened to the show for any length of time, you know that I've written several books called Divine Intervention, and my latest is Divine Intervention, 50 True Stories of God's Miracles Today. If you have that book, one of the people featured in that book is our guest today. His name is Eric Metaxas, and his story in my book is called The Golden Fish, and he's going to tell us how God reached into his life, and he was literally converted overnight by a dream. That's right, overnight by a dream. Eric Metaxas, he's an amazing guy, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about him. He's the New York Times #1 best-selling author of Bonhoeffer, Pastor, Martyr, Prophet, and Spy, and the acclaimed Amazing Grace, William Wilberforce, and the Heroic Campaign to End Slavery. His books have been translated into more than 20 languages, and after he graduated from Yale with an English degree, he published humor in the New York Times and the Atlantic and was a writer for Rabbit Ears Productions and Veggie Tales. He's written more than 30 children's books, including the bestsellers Squanto and the Miracle of Thanksgiving and It's Time to Sleep, My Love. And he speaks to tens of thousands around the United States and internationally each year. He was the keynote speaker at the 2012 National Prayer Breakfast and at the 2013 Canadian National Prayer Breakfast. He's the founder and host of Socrates in the City, the acclaimed series of conversations on, quote, life, God, and other small topics, end quote. He's a fellow New Yorker, and he's got a great sense of humor, very witty. And his book that we're going to be focusing on today is called, appropriately, Miracles. What they are, why they happen, and how they can change your life. His website is ericmetaxas.com, and it's my pleasure to welcome fellow New Yorker, fellow New Englander, fellow talk show host, and fellow author to Divine Intervention right now, Eric Metaxas. Eric, welcome to Divine Intervention Radio. Thank you so much for taking the time out of your busy schedule to spend with us today.
Well, it's my pleasure, and as you know, I take the subject very seriously.
Absolutely. Miracles. I mean, my gosh, I thought it was very ironic that you and I were both working on books about miracles at the same time. I didn't even know you were working on a book, but I asked you to share your story. The Golden Fish is one of the entries in my book, Divine Intervention, 50 True Stories of God's Miracles Today. One of my favorite stories, by the way. And we want to talk about your testimony. Gosh, it's been 10 years since you and I met back in 2006. It was at the Walter Hoving
That's right.
event with Stephen Baldwin. You remember that?
Yes, I do.
Good
It
stuff.
does seem 10 years ago, though. That's what's a little freaky, to be honest.
I know, it was a long time ago. But for those who are not familiar with you, tell us about your background growing up and, who is Eric Metaxas?
Well, thanks for asking. I was not raised as an evangelical Christian, right? I was raised, my mom and dad came over from Europe in the 50s. My dad came from Greece. My mom came from Germany. They met in an English class here in New York City. I live in New York City. And I always joke around, if you're raised by a Greek and a German, that means you will be raised Greek. And I was raised, in the Greek Orthodox Church. And so I was raised ostensibly as a Christian, but I never really, like a lot of people who go to churches, all different kinds of churches, many times it's just what you do. You're not really getting it. You're not really saying, do we believe this? Do we want to live this out? It's just what you do culturally.
Right.
So for me, it wasn't something that I ever really understood all that well. And when I got to college, I went to Yale University, which is, very, very secular. All of academia is secular, but Yale is particularly secular and pretty hostile to serious faith in the Bible. And so I just really drifted, away from any kind of serious Christian faith. And when I graduated, I was really lost. I realized that I don't know what I believe. I don't know if anybody can know what is true. And I was not happy. I was a writer, trying to be a writer, I should say. I was really struggling badly. I ended up moving back in with my parents just because I was floundering, trying to be a writer, not making any money. And it was really a hard time for me. And in that year, I was 24, as I was living with my parents, it was such a hard year, and I got an awful job as a proofreader at Union Carbide Chemical Corporation in Danbury, Connecticut. I mean, it was the antithesis of what you would think that I would be, suited for. It was just terrible. And in that misery, I have to say, I met someone who was a serious Christian who basically, started sharing his faith with me, and who I was really not encouraging it too much. I was kind of, I mean, actually, that's not even.
You mentioned that in your story, The Golden Fish, that this guy Ed was someone who was a born-again Christian, and you were trained at Yale to steer well clear of these type of people, right?
Exactly. In other words, he was a really nice guy, but I kind of thought, you don't want, to become like one of those people. They're crazy religious people, and so he was really kind, but I was really holding him at arm's length. At the same time, because he was such a nice guy, and because I was in such pain, we did have some conversations, but I was never inclined to accept it. We would just have these conversations. But this went on for, almost a year of back and forth, and at some point around my 25th birthday, something happened. My uncle got sick. He was in a coma, and Ed said, can we pray for your uncle? And he told me he had people in his church praying for my uncle, and I was blown away by this. And one day he asked me to, would we pray? And we went to a conference room and we prayed, and I really felt something happened. Like I thought, whoa, that was real. What was that? And
what kind of something did you feel?
Well, it's hard to say. It wasn't like overtly mystical, but it was close to it. It really felt like it's almost as if a heavenly breeze blew through the room, and I just sensed something different. It wasn't like an actual breeze, but it was like I really thought, whatever that was, that there was something real there. What was that?
Something in the spirit.
Understand it. Yeah, in the spirit realm, definitely. Yeah, and so a few days later, or actually a couple of weeks later, I think I had a dream. Now I won't tell the story now because I tell it in my Miracles book, and I also There's a video on my website where I tell it in detail. It's my website, of course, just my name, ericmetaxas.com. But it's an amazing video and an amazing story. But basically what happened was one night I had a dream, and it was one of those dreams that was clearly the Lord speaking to me in the dream, really in a way to get my attention so dramatically. It totally blew my mind. I mean, basically, Jesus reveals himself to me in the dream in a way that was utterly real and unforgettable. And, and I woke up and I went to work the next day, and my friend Ed Tuttle, who'd been talking with me, said, well, what do you think it means? And I shared with him, I said, I think it means I've accepted Jesus. I mean, that's what it means.
That is awesome.
It was game over. I mean, it was from that point on, I knew without a doubt that this was real, that just that dream was a transcendental, miraculous experience of God speaking to me. And it was just, it was the first real miracle I'd ever experienced, but it changed everything and opened up the door to, my walk with God, which is, coming up on 30 years almost.
That's awesome. I love how God can speak to each individual person the way that they need to be spoken to, the way that they need to be met.
That's exactly what the story of the dream really tells. I've told it, I've given that testimony a number of times, and I probably will speak it at Times Square Church in a couple of weeks at one of their services here in New York, because it's such a remarkable illustration of God's love, is that he will speak to us in a language that makes sense to us. And I don't just mean English. I mean, he knows the secret vocabulary of our hearts.
Absolutely.
And in that dream, he spoke to me in the secret vocabulary of my heart. It wouldn't have made sense to anybody else, but he was talking right to me about my life in a way that just totally blew my mind. I said, this is real. This is God. I can't even, I just can't deny it. Even if I want to deny it, I really wasn't able to. It was just so real.
Right.
And so I was deeply affected. I mean, in fact, it's more than deeply affected. I was transformed. I really was born again overnight.
That is amazing. I love hearing stories like that. And friend, when you read the Bible, you see that God spoke through dreams to many different people in the Bible. I mean, Joseph was one of the dramatic ones, but many other people as well. Pharaoh, other people. And so, this is one of the ways that God speaks to us. He speaks through his word, the Bible. He also speaks through dreams, theophanies, all sorts of ways, but God breaks through and speaks to us personally the way we need to be spoken to, and he can change you in an instant, overnight, just like he did with Eric. Friend, you're listening to Divine Intervention Radio. I am your host, Daniel Fazina, and we are visiting with our special guest, Mr. Eric Metaxas. He is a best-selling author, fellow radio show host himself, and he's written many different books, including Bonhoeffer and William Wilberforce. And, the main topic of our discussion today is his book, Miracles, what they are, why they happen, and how they can change your life. Well, Eric, you consider your dream to be a miracle, and you've experienced, obviously, that and other miracles in your life. But why did you write a book on the whole subject of miracles?
Well, I'm very quick to say it was not my idea. I have had experience. I've had many friends who have experienced amazing miracles. And I don't use that word lightly. I mean, a lot of times people confuse blessing with miracle, and they say, the Lord did this. And you say, listen, be careful, because we know the Lord does everything, but when you're talking about a miracle, that's an extraordinary thing, right? Mm-hmm. And so I have had a number of friends who've experienced out and out miracles, amazing stories over the years. I've been so encouraged to hear them. And then I have experienced, I would say maybe 9 or 10 over the years that have just been mind-blowing. I always use that adjective. Just absolutely staggering things. And I intended to write an autobiography where I weave these stories in as I tell my story, my journey with God. And never intended to write a book on miracles, but one day I was having lunch with my current editor here in New York City. He's the editor of Viking Press, which has published my new book about America, titled "If You Can Keep It." That's the book that's just coming out in a couple of weeks here. But
awesome.
That editor, Brian Tart, and I were having a conversation at lunch, just talking, and as I often do, I just shared one of these amazing miracle stories from my life, to encourage him or whatever. And he was so taken aback. He said, "Eric, you need to write a book on miracles." And I said, well, I'm glad you feel that way, but I don't really want to write a book on miracles, and I don't intend to. And he basically hounded me for a year For, just saying you've got to do this, and finally, my wife said, if you don't, I'm sorry, sorry for the beep. My wife said, if you don't do this, somebody else will do it, and it's going to be done in kind of an overtly religious way or something like that. Mm-hmm. And you need to write a book that is at once open to miracles, but also has a bit of a skepticism toward the miraculous, because oftentimes you find people that are really skeptical and they don't believe miracles happen, or you find people on the other end of the spectrum that there's a gullibility kind of.
Sure.
And she said, you need to write a book, that only you can write. I mean, that's my wife flattering me, that would really look at it with some skepticism, but also with an openness, because you've experienced miracles. Right. And, what about that? What'd you think about that? So I finally said yes, and I didn't really know what I was going to do. I just knew that I was going to tell a bunch of the stories of my own miracles. I tell the story of the dream and a couple of other miracles, that the reader can, I think, be amazed by just because they're true stories. And then I tell the stories of a number of friends. I can vouch for every one of them because I know them personally. These aren't just kooks that I found on the internet. And so I said, I know I'm going to do that, but the rest of the book took some time because I got this crazy idea that the biggest miracle of all is the creation of the world and the universe. I said, God doing that makes the parting of the Red Sea look like a joke. I mean, there's nothing more amazing than the creation of all that is, in the universe. And I have read a number of books on the scientific side of that over the years, and have been really stunned because the facts are that people like Hugh Ross in California and John Lennox, who teaches at Oxford in England, they've written a number of books talking about the fine-tuned universe, that if one little thing were different, the whole universe wouldn't exist. And even atheists have to admit that it sure looks like an intelligent,
design,
super genius invented this world. It looks that way, right? So I said, the more you look at it from a scientific point of view, the more chilling it is. The more you think, oh my gosh, there is no way that this just happened. It's simply not possible. And I said, let me write about that in the beginning of the book, because that really is the biggest evidence we have for God. It's something that scientists can look at. And I said, let me write about that. So I write about that in the book, and it ends up in some ways being the most exciting part of the book. I wrote an op-ed on that very subject, and the Wall Street Journal published it, and it literally became the most popular shared article in the history of the Wall Street Journal. 625,000 Facebook likes.
Wow.
And that's because most people in the world are incredibly curious. Is God real? Do we have evidence for him? So to me, that's the biggest miracle, and that's the first part of the book.
Yeah, and I appreciated what you did in that, because you talk about the evidence for God from a scientific and creation standpoint. You also go into philosophy and logic about the existence of God before you even get to the testimonials, which is, I thought, very well done. And yeah, it will speak to, hopefully, the scientific person or the skeptic who's at least open-minded. And, I had a similar kind of approach when I wrote Divine Intervention, 50 True Stories of God's Miracles Today, because most of the people in the book were people I knew personally, kind of like you. And I also fought really hard in the case of medical miracles to include medical documentation in the book. So you can read about, tumors disappearing and, other things from places like Cedars-Sinai Medical Center in Los Angeles and the Mayo Clinic in Rochester, Minnesota. And you know what's funny, Eric? The publisher said, we need to collect medical documentation on all these cases. So, all right. So I grabbed them all. I thought, this is good. I submitted them, and they weren't going to publish them. And I'm like, what are you talking about? And they're like, oh, no, that's just for us internally. We want to make sure the stories are true. I'm like, no. We need to put these in there because there are people who want to know. They want to dig deeper. And I think for the person who's made up their mind, like you said, one side or the other, for the person who's a true believer, you don't need evidence. But for the person who's a real true skeptic, no amount of evidence would be sufficient. But for the person who's open-minded and in the middle, I think that documentation will go a long way.
Well, you're exactly right, and those are the people you want to reach. And as I say, there are people who are hardcore secularists, and they won't even discuss the subject.
Right.
And then there are people who are they're so religious in a way that they're not thinking rationally or critically. We need to be critical. We shouldn't check our brains at the door, so to speak. We should really try to understand these things, if only to communicate them to people who don't share our faith. And
Absolutely.
I think that that is important, and that's why I love your approach in your book. And I just think that it's something you can't get enough of. People are hungry for it. So yeah, that's obviously something both of us take pretty seriously.
Absolutely. And you mentioned that people are hungry for it. And I wanted to ask you, why do you think that is in today's environment? Why do you think there's such a hunger for this type of material and it's becoming more popular? I mean, the Bible says that in the last days, God will pour out his Spirit on all flesh, and your old men will dream dreams, your young men will see visions, or vice versa, I can't remember. But, he said he will pour out his Spirit and we'll be seeing more of the miraculous. I mean, why do you think there's a hunger for that today in particular?
Well, I would say because, especially in the West, we've been starved. There has been this secularist narrative that has taken hold, really, especially since the 60s, so that you don't ever really get stories like this. And I think that people more and more say, I want to know, is this real? Is this all there is? Or is this God thing, is there something real here? And if you're starved for something, obviously, whenever you see a little bit of it, you're going to go in that direction, and you're not going to see this kind of thing dealt with in any serious fashion on TV or generally speaking. It's just not something that people have as I say, since the 60s. I mean, the skepticism goes further back, but a hostility to these kinds of things. So I think that people say, look, we want to know, what can we know? I mean, when I wrote the first 2 chapters of my Miracles book, I was myself astounded. I said, everybody should read this because it will embolden your faith. When you read this, you say, this is amazing. How could I ever doubt? We now have tremendous scientific evidence.
Right.
People say, well, that's not faith. That's not true. We're supposed to believe in what is true. We're supposed to trust in God. It's not just some mental exercise. We're supposed to really test things, and we're supposed to know, is what I believe true, or is it just something I believe because my parents told me to believe it? At some point, you really want to know, and you want to know, what can I know rationally? What is there evidence for? And the fact is that, for those who were willing to look at it, there's outrageous evidence. And I have a chapter on the resurrection. That's the most startling thing of all, is that you would think that there'd be no real evidence for something that happened 2,000 years ago. It's just something we take on faith, quote unquote. That is simply not true. There is a ton that we can know from the documents written at the time, and when you look at them, there is overwhelming evidence that all of the other explanations for what happened don't work.
Right.
Can't work. They're illogical.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate, what you've done in your book, Miracles, because, when you explain the cosmos and the evidence for creation and intelligent design, and I appreciate that you make the point that, hey, if God can speak the universe into existence and create something from nothing, all of this that we see, if that's the work of a creative God who's all-powerful, then it would not be a stretch of logic to think he could cure cancer or raise the dead.
Well, exactly. Exactly.
It's logical.
The version, the way I always put it, I say, it's kind of like saying, I believe Leo Tolstoy could write War and Peace, which is 1,400 pages long, but I don't believe he could move a comma in the manuscript.
That's right. I love that.
Saying, I believe God could create this huge, huge universe, but did I believe he could part the Red Sea? No. Could he raise somebody from the dead? No. Could he cure cancer? No. And you say, wait a minute. Why not?
Right.
It really makes sense. Then don't believe that he created the universe. But most people do believe that he created the universe. They just don't get into the specifics.
Right. Well, man, I really appreciate that. I'm having a great time talking to you. Friend, you're listening to Divine Intervention Radio. I'm your host, Daniel Fazina. We'll be right back with more from our special guest, Eric Metaxas. We'll be talking about his book, Miracles, and the subject of miracles in general. As you know, that is close to both of our hearts.
You're listening to Divine Intervention with Daniel Fazina, and we'll return in just a moment.
I believe in miracles.
Hi, Kevin McCullough, Fox News and Talk Radio. Let me ask you a question. Do you like the word free? Like free energy? Yeah, free electricity, free natural gas. Would that help your family budget on a month-to-month basis to get your energy bills eliminated from your month-to-month costs? Do you even know that it's possible to get free energy? Well, it completely is. My good friend Daniel Fazina is an independent energy consultant for a company called Ambit Energy, and he has put together a powerful presentation as to how you can get free energy and how to do it quickly. If you'd like more information, go to freepowernow.com. That's freepowernow.com. Or if you're ready to get free energy as fast as possible, get your energy bill and dial 205-55-AMBIT. That's 205-55-AMBIT.
Divine Intervention welcomes the support of Latirzo Associates, Certified Public Accountants. Latirzo Associates, Certified Public Accountants is a family-owned and operated Christian business serving their clients with quality accounting services for over 40 years, offering full-service accounting for any type of business, large or small, in any state of the union. Latirzo Associates, Certified Public Accountants, 12 Oak Street, No. 5, West Hampton Beach, New York, 11978. Phone 631-288-3334. That's 631-288-3334. Hey, this is Daniel Fazina of Divine Intervention Radio. The Bible contains some incredible stories of miracles and divine interventions. Jesus calmed a raging storm, healed paralytics, and even raised the dead. But are these types of events still happening today? The answer to this question, as you will see from reading my book, Divine Intervention, 50 True Stories of God's Miracles Today, is an emphatic yes. Contained within the book is a collection of amazing true stories that attest to this fact. You will read the astonishing first-hand accounts of people who have been healed of paralysis, terminal cancer, and tumors through prayer. You will see the love of God powerfully transform the life of an Islamic terrorist. You will witness the liberation of the demon-possessed, the resurrection of the dead, and much more. Prepare to be awed and inspired as you experience Divine Intervention. More information about Divine Intervention, 50 True Stories of God's Miracles Today can be found at www.divineinterventionradio.com or by calling 800-247-4784. That's 1-800-247-4784.
Hi, this is Cha-Cha from The Sopranos and the unofficial mayor of Little Italy, and you're listening to Divine Intervention with Daniel Fazina.
Satan, your kingdom must come down. Satan, your kingdom must come down. I heard the voice of Jesus Christ. Satan, your kingdom must come down. Tear your kingdom down. Pray till they tear your kingdom down. I heard the voice of Jesus Christ. Satan, your kingdom must come down.
Welcome back to Divine Intervention Radio. I'm your host, Daniel Fazina, and if you're just joining us, we're having a great conversation visiting with our special guest, Eric Metaxas. He's a New York Times best-selling author and a fellow radio host himself. Eric, welcome back.
Well, joy to be with you, Daniel. Thanks for having me.
Well, it's my pleasure. This was a long time coming. You and I have crossed paths many times. We travel in the same circles, fellow New Yorkers, so it's great to have you on the show.
Well, it's good to know that there are other New Yorkers doing radio on these subjects, because I think it's just kind of New York, has been pretty secular over the years, but more and more I see an openness to faith, people of faith who are bolder about their faith. So I'm just that's one of the reasons we live in New York. I feel like it's it's a mission field. Let's put it that way.
Absolutely, it is. So I appreciate you being there and holding down the fort. I retreated to the Bible Belt, so I apologize for that. But Anyway.
Christians in the Bible Belt, too. That's kind of key.
Yeah. Well, we were talking about your amazing book, Miracles, what they are, why they happen, and how they can change your life. We were talking about that there's kind of a spiritual hunger for people, especially in the West, on this subject of miracles, and you've included pretty powerful testimonies in your book. But I wanted to ask you, what was the criteria for the type of miracle stories that you actually did include? What was it that helped them make the cut, so to speak?
Well, yeah, that's a good question. I had a number of friends tell me stories that it's not that they weren't miracles or that they didn't, that they didn't convince me that they were miracles, but they didn't come across as dramatic. In other words, they sort of sounded a little dull when you told the story. Okay. So the actual miracle itself might have been amazing, but a miracle story needs to get the reader. In other words, the reader needs to say, I get it. Wow, that's incredible.
Right.
So, in other words, there are times when you have a number of details that make it come to life. And so those stories were the ones that I wanted to put in there. And also, there's some stories that I would say, maybe it wasn't a miracle. I mean, if somebody, I had a friend tell me a story about falling out of a window and landing on some soft dirt, and that there'd been cement around, and how amazing that he fell from this distance and whatever. And you think, okay, I think it's a miracle. I think it's a blessing. But a lot of people just say, hey, that was just luck.
Right.
Even though I would say, it's like sinful to say, oh, it's just luck. I mean, my goodness, what a wonderful thing that you fell on the dirt. And I would never say it's just luck. But a lot of people might not get that story. They might just say, well, I don't know, like he could have, it's just one of those things.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the story needs to communicate more powerfully. And so I didn't put that story in just because I thought a lot of people would say, well, I don't know, it just sounds like good luck or who knows or whatever. Yeah. And now, don't get me wrong, there are stories here that people will read and they will say, I'm not buying it or something. Sure. But I said I want to eliminate as much of that possibility as possible. I want people to be amazed, to say, if this is true, then this is amazing, and it's probably a miracle.
Right.
So I was careful about vetting the stories, and also I only wanted to put stories in of people that I knew personally, most of them friends, because that removes one level of skepticism. I can vouch for these people. So if you know me, I'm vouching for these people, and you can you can doubt it if you want, but at least it's not just this happened to somebody. This happened to somebody I know,
right? And
I can vouch for their personality. They're not liars. They're not crazy.
Right.
They have a history of telling the truth.
I appreciate that too, and I kind of did the same thing for my book, Divine Intervention. Most of the people in the book were people that I knew personally, and I even asked permission to include their contact information in the book, so website, email, that kind of thing, so people can reach out to them if they don't believe and say, hey, is this a real person?
I wanted to do that, and I couldn't do that. My publisher and some of the people wouldn't let me do that. And I thought, what a pity, because that's part of what makes it real. It's like call them up or go online, or and I mean, so people have to take my word for it, but everybody in the book is real, and these stories are real and they're true, and I would not, there's only one case where I had to change the name and a couple of details, but it's kind of like changing pear to apple and red to blue. It didn't affect anything, but the person didn't want people to know who they were. But I really think that is important when possible, to give as many specifics as possible. And when people tell stories, I always say to them, listen, if I'm interviewing them on my radio program, I say, hold on, what about this? What about this?
Sure.
What about this? That we want the details so that we understand the timing, these little pieces that help us understand why you thought it was a miracle.
Sure, and that it goes along with having journalistic integrity too. You want to get,
sure,
yeah. I mean, as journalists, we're curious and we want to get the details, and we want to avoid having third-hand anecdotes. We want specifics, and we want to make sure this is real, because there is a very skeptical world out there that demands this kind of evidence. And whatever we can do to remove stumbling blocks to people's faith, we want to do that and point them to the Lord. And I always say, the miracles, the point of the miracles, as you illustrate in your book as well, is not for the miracle themselves. It is to point people to the God of miracles. And I really appreciate what you said about that.
That's a big piece of the book, actually, is to define what is a miracle, and then to realize that a miracle, the Greek word is semeios, so the New Testament word is semeios, meaning a sign of what? A sign doesn't point to itself. It's a sign pointing to something, and all these are signs of God and God's power, and if you miss that, it's not a miracle. Then it's just some amazing thing, but it's not a miracle.
Yeah. And it's funny you mentioned that story about someone who told you that they fell out of a window and landed in a soft patch. I actually experienced something like that when I was in Denmark. I was riding a horse with my friend, and unbeknownst to me, the horse had never had two people on it at the same time before. She didn't tell me this beforehand. So I get on, never having ridden a horse before, taking lessons. The horse bucks us off, and I landed, no joke, but right between a huge rock, like a boulder, and an electric fence. There was only like a 2-foot clearing, and I landed on a soft piece of grass right between the two. And I never looked at that as a miracle, but I definitely acknowledged that God was protecting me and keeping me safe, because I could have easily been killed either way.
Right, and you get that. In other words, that it's a little bit all on a continuum, because miracles involve the viewer. In other words, there's a subjectivity to it that when you know all the details and everything, you say, "Wow, I was amazed." But somebody else might not know all those details; they might not have lived through it, and they would just say, "Well, it's nice, but I don't get the big deal." Right. That's part of the problem in communicating these things. I've had things happen to me which would be very tough to communicate to another person. I've tried with a few stories, and you realize the other person's not really getting it the way I intend them to get it. Why aren't they getting the wow factor? And I think it's just because there are so many details that you can internalize coming when you experience something.
Right. You had to be there, kind of.
Yeah, you had to be there.
Well, let's talk about some of the specific stories in your book that you've included. There's so many powerful stories in there, but tell us a couple of your favorites.
Well, one is, and I included all different kinds of miracles, and some of them people would say, well, is that a miracle? But I have a couple of angel experiences with angels, one of which is a friend, Peter Martin, who has a few times had the tremendous privilege of seeing angels very clearly.
Okay.
And when he tells the story, it is so astounding. I said, what an incredible gift. I mean, because there were other people in the room. They didn't see anything.
Right.
It was at St. Thomas's Church in New York City, St. Thomas Episcopal on Fifth Avenue. You wouldn't expect that kind of a thing, but he saw two gigantic angels, and he describes them in detail. And I have to say, it's really stunning when you hear the detail, like how big it was, what it was doing, what it made him feel like. I mean, it really is astounding. And that's a story that people have commented on.
And this is someone you know personally, and you can vouch for their
character?
character?
Oh, yeah, I know him well, absolutely. Yeah, very well.
So you wouldn't think he was a little off his rocker by describing this?
Well, that's the point, is that I wouldn't put anything in the book by somebody that I myself didn't trust, because I don't want somebody to question them and then to say, oh, this guy's crazy. I wanted to put in stories by people that I knew were buttoned up, and, my friend Peter's a good example of that. And so it's, at the end of the day, people will believe what they want to believe. There's some people that will never be convinced, but
sure.
I think most open-minded people would have to say, hey, most of these stories have to be true. There is no other way around. There's no other rational explanation.
Right. And when you when you read the Bible, you see that angels did appear to people, and even Jesus appeared to people. And if you look at the conversion of Saul on the road to Damascus, Jesus appeared to him, but the people around him did not see Jesus. They heard something, but they didn't see it. And so,
and again, there are people today who would say, "Oh, that kind of stuff could happen in biblical times, but it's not happening anymore." And I would say, "Well, not according to what I know.
Right.
According to what I know, these things are happening now. It might not be exactly the same. Nobody's parted the Red Sea recently, but at the same time, I have many friends who've seen angels, who've experienced, as I say, the miraculous in a way that." Hard to deny, at least it's hard for me to deny, and I am looking to poke holes. I don't want to believe something that's possibly untrue. I want to be very careful, and I think we're supposed to be careful, but not so careful that we don't believe anything. So that's that's something that again, it's why I put in so many details. Some of the details are strange, and it's the same kind of thing that you get in Scripture when Jesus, for example, tells the disciples after the resurrection, cast your net on that side of the boat. And they kind of roll their eyes like, who's this guy? We haven't caught any fish. And then they catch a ton of fish. It's so heavy they cannot carry it. And they count the fish, and it's 153 fish.
Very specific number.
A folktale would say thousands or 10,000. This says 153. Why this incredibly specific number? It defies, meaning. It's not like 40 or 12. It just seems to stand alone as a number of fish. And I sometimes think details like that are the key to us believing a story.
Sure.
So that is a good example of a specificity that helps the person understand this is not metaphorical, this is real.
That's great. Have you done any in-depth study on why you think 153? Is that number significant in any way to the story, or is it just a detail?
I have looked into it, yeah, and I have never seen anything. I mean, it's a number that it's a prime number that you can't divide by 2, or it's just a strange. Actually, that's not true. It's 51 times 3, so 51 is a prime number. But I really have never discovered any reason for that number except they counted, and that's how many fish were there.
Okay. It's interesting because there are a lot of details and numbers in the Bible, and one of the things that I really loved is the story in the Gospels where the first miracle of Jesus, where he turns water into wine. He goes and he gets 6 water pots, and he changes the water into wine. The number 6, I didn't catch this until I saw a teaching on it, but I think that says a lot about what Jesus was saying about his divinity. God created the world in 6 days, and here he was with 6 water pots with his first miracle, changing the water into wine. And I was blown away by that, because I think the Word of God has so many layers to it, so much meaning.
Well, that's right. It does, and that's why the weird thing of the 153 fish, it's a strange thing in Scripture. It's the same thing when John, the disciple, describes the story of being clothed only in a sheet, and he ran away, and they grabbed the sheet, and he ran away naked. And you think, what is the point of that? What is that story? Like, it just seems so, it's what happened. Somebody told a story, but there's no meaning. Now, there may be some meaning, but it just sounds so strange that it has to be true.
Yeah, interesting. Wow. Friend, you're listening to Divine Intervention Radio. I am your host, Daniel Fazina, and we're visiting with our special guest, Eric Metaxas. He is a best-selling author, and he is a fellow talk show host as well of the Eric Metaxas Show. And I love in your show that you say you are the permanent guest host. Is that right?
Yeah, the permanent. I goof around a lot. I like to mix genres. I think when I'm talking about God and serious things, I like to joke around.
Absolutely.
And when I'm joking around, I may bring in God. It's kind of funny. In fact, I'll tell you the truth. The book that just came out that that is coming out now about America has miracle stories in it, because I really think that that's a part of how God communicates in history.
Absolutely.
And that the United States of America, we had a number of miracles in our beginning as a way of God sort of making clear, I am in this. This matters to me. The miracle of the story of Squanto, I won't tell it now, the story of the Battle of Long Island, the Constitution itself. A number of the people who were there when the Constitution was written said it shouldn't have happened. It was a miracle. We prayed, and we can't believe that it actually happened. I mean, they're on the record as saying it seemed really clear to them that God's finger was involved in this.
Right.
And so I said I want to write about that, because people need to know, that this is not just another country, that we have a particular responsibility to God, and
right.
So I kind of mix and match. Whenever I'm writing about one thing, I'm going to put in something else. That's just what I do.
From my studies, the formation of America, as you mentioned, did have a lot of miraculous things, and it was it's a special country, and its origins, in this country, I think there's a concerted effort for us to, or for people to try and forget our Judeo-Christian roots. But our founders were men of faith.
That's honestly, Daniel, why I wrote the book. I mean, the new book is titled "If You Can Keep It," and that's at the heart of the book. I talk about George Whitefield and how his preaching up and down the 13 colonies created this nation. And that's not hyperbolical. That is basically true, that when you understand what happened to the 13 colonies because of his preaching, it set the stage for self-government. It set the stage for people who were so zealous to please God that they would govern themselves. And, that's real. That's history. We need to know our history. And so God communicates through miracles, and part of how he communicated to America and to Americans over the years has been with miracles. And I don't want to make too much of it, but we ought to understand that faith, and Christian faith in particular, plays a very central role. It is simply undeniable, and I wanted to write about it because Americans need to know. It is a fact, and they need to know this. Otherwise, they will think, well, this country's just like any other country. It's like, no, we have a particular responsibility to the world given to us by God. We need to take it seriously.
Absolutely. Now, does the term American exceptionalism mean anything to you?
Oh yeah, I mean, I write about it in the new book, If You Can Keep It. I write a lot about it because I say that people have misunderstood American exceptionalism. American exceptionalism doesn't mean that America is better than other nations, because every American has just as much original sin as every German, every Frenchman, every Japanese person. We are inherently the same. We're sinners, and
sure.
And yet the ideas behind this government, the founding, those ideas, to my mind, are undeniably unique and special, and a promise to the whole world that we can govern ourselves and we can have these liberties. And so I believe in American exceptionalism, but it means that these are ideas that if we do not live them out, as I say in the title, if you can keep it. Franklin said it's a republic, madam, if you can keep it. And if you can't keep it, it will be taken away from you. So American exceptionalism is not an irrevocable gift. It's something that's given to us, but if we don't live it out and if we don't take it seriously, it will be taken away. And so that's a big part of the book.
Wow. In my research, I came across a quote by, I can't remember who exactly it was, but I think it was one of the founders that said that the U.S. Constitution was written to govern a religious and moral people, and it is wholly inadequate to govern any other type of people.
That's right.
And do you know who said that?
That was John Adams.
John Adams, okay.
That quote is in my book and a number of other quotes along those lines. It's a central part of the book that without faith, you cannot have self-government. And the United States was founded by people, every one of whom, including Jefferson and Franklin, understood this so deeply that they just about took it for granted. I mean, they wrote about it in a number of places, but they couldn't even imagine people not understanding that, because everybody in America seemed to get it at the time. What my book is about has much to do with how we have forgotten these things and how we need to remind ourselves. I mean, it's why I wrote the book, is to tell every American, you need to understand this. This is not optional.
And if we're disconnecting from our Judeo-Christian roots and our morality, I think that's one of the reasons we have such an overabundance of laws, and many of which are contradicting the Constitution. Like, we're losing our liberties.
You're exactly right. No, what you just said is exactly right. That what happens is, if you don't govern yourself, then the government governs you,
right?
and has to impose more and more laws.
Oh, it's
and
horrible.
We should be above the law in the sense that we say, I'm not going to steal, not because there's a law against it, but because I believe it's wrong. That's what self-government is, and that comes from virtuous people. And so that's at the very heart of the book, because it's at the heart of America.
That's wonderful. Friend, again, you're listening to Divine Intervention Radio. We're having a very stimulating and thought-provoking conversation with our special guest, Eric Metaxas. Eric, I love the fact that you are humorous, you're intellectual, and you're spiritual. It's not often you can find those three qualities in the same person, but you pull it off very well, friend. So, thank you very much.
Thank you. I have no choice. This is who I am. It's kind of sometimes it's been a burden, but it's I really think that we're all created obviously uniquely, and I'm glad that I have this this kind of personality. But it's not always easy. I think that sometimes people take me seriously when I'm joking, and other times people think I'm joking when I'm serious, and I have to. It's a real effort sometimes. The radio program that I have makes it it's easier for me to show the different sides of myself, depending on who I'm interviewing.
Now, it's interesting. I look at your website, and the Eric Metaxas Show, it says that it's the show about everything. I mean, how do you encompass everything in one radio show?
Well, obviously you don't. That's the short answer. But what I mean is that
any topic.
Yes, there are two things to be said. First of all, Abraham Kuyper, who was a Dutch theologian and statesman Christian, once famously said, "There's not one square inch of creation over which Jesus Christ does not say mine." Colson used to quote that all the time. Every part of creation belongs to God, and so every subject, sports, politics, whatever you're talking about, God wants to be part of that conversation. So I think that the idea that I'm only going to talk about quote-unquote religious subjects is to narrow God and to put him into a box, and I think that that's theologically incorrect, and that we often do that, and we either push him way out or we only talk about religious things. And I think that we need to have a place, and I hope my show is that place, to talk about everything, and God is part of that everything. So that's really, there is some thought behind it, but it's also kind of, cheeky, the show about everything, what does that even mean? But it's half serious, as most of what I do is.
Well, I really enjoy it, and I'm thankful that you're doing it, and I love your approach, because obviously your worldview, your Jesus-colored glasses, if I could say that, will shape the way you look at the world and the way you approach these topics. So, very good stuff.
That's exactly correct, and I want to help other people do that as well. It's part of why I'm doing the show. And I should say, if people are interested, the website for the show is simply metaxastalk.com. So if you go to metaxastalk.com, you can find all of the podcasts and all the guests and everything is there. But my regular website is just ericmetaxas.com, but you can get to either of them, through the other one.
All right. Well, you know what? We've got about 30 seconds left, and in that time, what do you hope that people take away from when they read your book, Miracles? What is your main takeaway?
I hope it will encourage people who don't have much faith to have faith, to know that God is real and true and active today. And people who have faith, I want them to walk away with a bolder faith, to say, like, what was I thinking? I know this is true. God is real, and I need to live like he's real. So it's really for everybody. That's my intention.
Well, amen. Eric Metaxas, our special guest today. Thank you, sir, for the work you're doing, and thank you for taking the time to share with us and encouraging us on Divine Intervention with your Miracles book and your testimonies. God bless you, sir.
Oh, thank you so much, Daniel. God bless you.
Well, friend, that about does it for this episode of Divine Intervention Radio. I hope it has encouraged you to let you know that God is real and is still doing miracles in the world. Again, our special guest has been Eric Metaxas. Go to his website, ericmetaxas.com or metaxastalk.com. My website again, divineinterventionradio.com. We'll see you again next week for another exciting episode of Divine Intervention Radio. Take care and God bless.
You've been listening to Divine Intervention with your host, Daniel Fazina. You can email Daniel at divineintervention@mail.com. That's divineintervention@mail.com. All programs of Divine Intervention are available online at divineinterventionradio.com. That's divineinterventionradio.com. Join us next time here on Divine Intervention.
I believe in miracles.
Times are tough, not getting easier, but there's an opportunity that could make a significant change in your financial situation. People are paying too much for home utilities, and everybody has them. Help friends and family save money and get paid for it. No obligation. You don't even have to talk to anyone unless you want to. Just listen to a 3-minute recorded message. Call now, 715-GET-CASH. That's 715-GET-CASH. Listen, decide, and you could be on your way to a better tomorrow. 715-438-2274. That's 715-GET-CASH.